All right, man, peace. So probably the biggest story that has been propagated by the mainstream media over the last week is the repeal by the FCC of the net neutrality laws. Let's see what they have to say. Of course, I'm going to chime in.
Some states are threatening lawsuits after the Federal Communications Commission removed so-called net neutrality rules on internet providers.
Yes, the reason why the states are going to threaten lawsuits is because they don't want to have to regulate the internet state by state. They want the FCC to have to do that. The FCC does not want to have to regulate the internet. They don't feel like it's within their job description as a commission to have to regulate the internet. And it really isn't. Okay? A lot of people don't understand what's going on with this net neutrality issue. And the reason why the pro net neutrality faction is promoting this red herring about how this is going to take away people's right to free speech and things of that nature. Net neutrality came in 2015. So that premise would have made more sense if it had come in like 1991 or 92 or something like that. Net neutrality is a pretty new premise. And basically, the whole red herring about the loss of the freedom of speech on the internet is something that's being pushed by the major corporations and the sponsors of the major corporations, the foreign investors who are netting major money overseas through the net neutrality laws. And they want the net neutrality laws to stay because if they get stripped, now you're going to have now the internet is going to basically regulate itself. You're going to have internet service providers who are going to be able to charge different websites according to the amount of bandwidth that they demand. Okay? It has very, very little to do with freedom of speech. If they want to take away your freedom of speech, they can do it a myriad of ways. They don't have to repeal laws like net neutrality.
The FCC's new chairman said those regulations were blocking innovation.
In other words, the net neutrality regulations were stopping. They were pretty much hampering what America claims to be about economically, which is an open market.
The repeal could hurt content providers like Google, Facebook, Twitter, and Netflix.
You see that? Why? Because those sites, those are the websites that have the most traffic, which means they stand to have the most to lose by the repeal of net neutrality. Always remember, when the media starts going on and on and on about there being some type of controversy, it always has to do with money and major corporations. It has nothing to do with the common man and woman. Nothing. These people do not care about you.
They say the fight isn't over.
The chair votes aye. The item is adopted.
The Federal Communications Commission moved forward in a 3-2 vote. Outside, protesters and lawmakers gathered.
Please pay attention to many of those flags. They show you the black silhouette, the silhouette of the black fist. That's for Marxism. Okay?
Threatening to overthrow the ruling.
We are out here in the cold to turn the heat up on the Federal Communications Commission.
Yes, because you don't want the additional responsibility of possibly having to regulate the internet in your state. All this really is a pass the hot potato. The FCC does not want to have to regulate the internet, and these different state legislatures, they don't want to have to be involved with having to negotiate with many of these ISPs, internet service providers, state by state, on what the charges are going to be for providing their state's residents with internet access. Now look at the flag to the right of the screen there. You're going to see the fist in the air and the black flag. That all that is for Marxism. Okay?
It is time for us to restore internet freedom.
And this fool, this fool's getting all type of death threats. Just for trying to bring back an open market. He was made the chairman of the FCC by Donald Trump, and he actually was made a member of the FCC by Barack Obama. So people can't say that he's just a pawn of Donald Trump. And if you pay attention to most of Donald Trump's provisions, him being a businessman, they normally revolve around the opening of the business markets, the promotion of free trade, so on and so forth. So if you have a business mind, none of these things are truly bothering you. But the liberal power mongers are fear mongering. And one of the main tactics that they use is they're trying to take away your free speech.
Chairman Ajit Pai argued the internet is not a utility that the government can regulate.
What I am saying
is that it is not the job of the government to be in the business of picking winners and losers in the internet economy.
Exactly. In other words, when you have net neutrality, all the big time bandwidth users on the internet, the websites like Twitter, YouTube, Facebook, these companies are making billions upon billions of dollars because they're basically being charged as if they're a regular website. And the bandwidth that they're using is an extraordinary amount. The traffic on the internet that they're using is taking up an extraordinary amount of bandwidth. And they're not being forced to pay any higher rates than a regular upstart website. It's like if it's basically like if you had an internet package where you were using, 10 terabytes of bandwidth every month, and another person was using, 50 gigs of bandwidth every month, and you guys were both paying the same bill. You'd be like, what the hell is going on here? That basically is what net neutrality does. So this is how one knows that the person who passed the net neutrality laws, Barack Obama, most likely was getting huge kickbacks from these companies like Facebook and Twitter, Netflix, etc.
We should have a level playing field and let consumers decide.
Those against
Right, that's called open market. That's called business.
the measure say internet providers will charge
And look at these idiots, save the internet. What's they called?
consumers for high.
We should have a level playing field and let consumers decide.
Those against
Popularresistance.org. In other words, we're just here to protest for the sake of protesting. All right. Certain people are professional protesters. They don't even know what the fuck this is about. And when you do any research on net neutrality, that was a provision that was pushed by a man named George Soros. For those of you who don't know, that's an international investor, a Hungarian Caucasian Jew. I mentioned him on this channel previously in regards to some of my statements about the Discordian Marxist group known as the Black Lives Matter movement, which I call the Black Lesbians Matter movement. He has a Marxist front organization called the Open Society Foundation, which we know the term open society is really just code for quote unquote New World Order, Luciferian ideologies, so on and so forth, the promotion of pansexuality. That's why, once again, he's the backer of the Black Lesbian Matter movement. So brothers, always be very, very careful when you see a lot of these stories in the mainstream media where they try to galvanize you to get behind many of these narratives. There's always a little bit more than meets the eye. And if you want to know what the true story is, always follow the money.
Against the measure say internet providers will charge consumers for high-speed internet, and those who can't afford it will be left with poor connection.
Well, every year your cable bill goes up. Your cable bill is normally linked to your internet access. So nobody has been getting mad when they've been raising their cable bill every month. So all of a sudden they're trying to scare you into believing that, oh man, they're gonna boost up your internet access costs after they repealed the net neutrality. Well, this shit only been operational for 2 years. So what, were people in the dark ages, internet-wise, prior to 2015? No, they were not.
Thursday, critics of Chairman Pai launched attacks.
You can still post photos of cute animals, like puppies.
He appeared in this video, which many saw as mocking their concerns.
I don't know who his advisor was, but his advisor needs to be fired. The first thing that his advisor needed to tell him, Ajit Pai I'm talking about, his advisor needed to write a draft that would allow him to communicate to the masses exactly what net neutrality is and exactly how and who it would affect, so that he could explain it to them in a way that they would not be so prone to hyperventilation, because people are addicted to the internet. And it's understandable. It is a primary source of information. Basically, YouTube now is like an internet version of the Library of Alexandria. You can learn anything there. You can get anything there between Google and YouTube. And once again, those are two of the websites that are for net neutrality. Why? Because they have the most to gain. They're not paying anything additional for the amount of bandwidth that they're taking up. So once again, always follow the money in the major corporations.
He doesn't seem to care. He has refused to cooperate. He sort of laughed that off.
New York Attorney General
The reason why I laughed it off is because a lot of the premises that have been put forth by the mainstream media and people like you are ludicrous. You're just lazy. Most of these state politicians, they don't want to have to be held responsible for regulating the internet. What's that mean? They may have to negotiate with ISPs state by state, and they don't want to have to be, they don't want to have to be the recipient of a lot of the ire of their citizens when, their internet rates go up every year or so, or every 2 years or so, or whenever their plan runs out. They want to be able to blame the FCC. So once again, this is just about passing the buck.
Eric Schneiderman says he will sue the FCC, claiming the process of voting was not sound because the mandatory comment period was wrought with millions of fake comments.
Well, no shit. When a lot of these elected officials get put into office, you have a lot of fake votes. Hell, go on Amazon. When you look up some of the ratings for these products you want to buy, half of the damn comments are fake. That's a part of shady business practices.
This is not what the American people deserve, and we don't think something that the courts are going to put up.
Dissenting.
Well, look, it's disputable what the American people deserve. Okay? You normally get what you deserve based on your intellect or your mental acuity. So if you get bad things, it's normally because you're a damn fool.
Commissioners also claimed the majority refused to listen to public opinion. The agency that is supposed to protect you is actually abandoning you.
I don't even know if she know what the hell she's talking about.
Now, this repeal won't go into effect for a few months, so consumers won't be seeing the changes today. The FCC is trying to ease some concerns, saying that if an internet provider does raise your rates, that it has to disclose that. Of course, they can do it in the fine print that so many.
Yes, and they do it every 2 years or 3 years whenever your cable service plan expires. All right? So let's cut the bullshit out. And at the end of the day, if you open up a free market, what's going to happen? When ISPs decide that they're going to arbitrarily raise your rates, there's a chance that another ISP could pop up and promise you greater bandwidth, greater speed, access to the internet, cable service, and you're going to go to them, which is already what's happening. I have Verizon. I still get ads from other cable service providers because that's what you get when you have an open business, when you have an open market. You have competition. That's what's healthy. When the FCC is regulating these things, you're regulating business. You're stopping the best business from flourishing because you're hamstringing other businesses and their ability to catch up and knock a lot of these mega corporations out. That is why it makes sense for many of these mega corporations to deceive the masses of people into believing that the repeal of the net neutrality laws are going to affect their quote unquote free speech. How the hell is Google going to talk about free speech? That's Google and Facebook are basically just CIA tracking mechanisms. Allegedly. So they're talking about free speech? Like, come on, man. If Twitter's so into free speech, why do they put a limit on how many characters somebody could put in a comment? Come on now. Oh, and before I slip my mind, George Soros, since I brought him up, he attended a school called the London School of Economics. And I mentioned this school in previous videos. The London School of Economics was founded by a man named Sidney Webb, or he was one of the main founders of that school. Sidney Webb was a member of a Marxist organization known as the Fabian Society. Spell F as in Frank, A, B as in boy, I-A-N. Fabian Society. Most of your most erudite, quote unquote, scholars and intelligentsia were members of the Fabian Society. Most of your great novelists, quote unquote great, I definitely put that in quotes, quote unquote great novelists and intelligentsia and most erudite and learned men who affected the planet in the 20th century were members of the Fabian Society and also became teachers or students in the London School of Economics. Yeah, the London School of Economics is basically a front for Marxism / Luciferian principles. And George Soros attended that university. After he left, of course, he became a multi-billion dollar investor. And he started something called the Open Society Foundation, which, along with the Ford Foundation, were the two major sponsors for the net neutrality laws. So that tells you that they have the most to gain because they invested the most money, at least overtly the most money. We know that many of these other mega websites have a lot to gain as well because they're the ones putting out a lot of this propaganda. But back to the Fabian Society, you have certain men like George Orwell, John Maynard Keynes, also was a member of the Fabian Society. For those of you who don't know, John Maynard Keynes is probably the most important economist of the 20th century. There's a whole school of economic thought that is based off of his teachings known as Keynesian economics, which basically, to make a long story short, to simplify for you, Keynesian economics basically states that it is to the advantage of the globalist economic structure to make sure that all of the world's economies are in a constant state of inflation. And also that they want to take away private property, that they don't want any gold or silver backing the money, regulated income tax, basically the principles of Marxism. That's what John Maynard Keynes is responsible for promoting. And if I remember correctly, John Maynard Keynes was also an attendee at the Treaty of Versailles after World War I, which basically bankrupted Germany and precipitated World War II. Okay. Who else was in London School of Economics? Jomo Kenyatta. For those of you brothers who are into the Afrocentrism, Jomo Kenyatta, the founder of the Mau Maus, he attended the London School of Economics. Joseph Kennedy Jr., John Kennedy, Robert Kennedy Jr., many of your big movers and shakers. The Fabian Society also, and I touched on this in a previous video, they're the ones who bankrolled the Bolshevik Revolution. Okay? They actually bankrolled Lenin in his first attempt at a revolution, which got him banished in the first place. If I remember correctly, I believe he was banished to Switzerland. One of you brothers can correct me if I'm wrong about that. I believe they banished Trotsky to Canada, Lenin to Switzerland, and Stalin to Siberia, if I remember correctly. The Fabian Society is the group that bankrolled Lenin and assisted him in the Bolshevik Revolution. John Maynard Keynes spoke directly to Lenin and was heavily inspired by him, or they heavily inspired each other. Mussolini also was heavily inspired by the writings of John Maynard Keynes. So that's a person that brothers should be familiar with. He wrote a book, if I remember correctly, called The Consequences of the Peace, or The Consequence of Peace, something along those lines, in which he laid out his economic plan, which once again is all based in hyperinflation and the control of the flow of money. So that's all this basically is about with the neutrality laws. It has little to nothing to do with freedom of speech. All that shit is fear mongering. If they want to control your speech and what you say, it's nothing for them to do that. All they have to do is stage a false flag terror attack. And they can scare people shitless and make them think that if you hear somebody say anything, say something. If you hear somebody use certain terminology, say something. If they type something online, say something, report them. They could do that anytime. They don't have to fuck with the net neutrality laws to mess with your freedom of speech. This is all about money. Okay? The major search engines, the major users of bandwidth on the internet are making billions by not having to pay extra for their use of international bandwidth. Because remember, websites like YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, those are international websites. Okay? And once again, George Soros is behind it. The Ford Foundation is behind it. And in my view, it's very, very clear that Barack Obama got a heavy paycheck from agreeing to ratify the net neutrality laws back 2 years ago. It was probably just a thank you paycheck on his way out for a lot of the other socialist agendas that he put forth, particularly pertaining to the promotion of homosexuality and lesbianism. Okay? So that's all it's about. When you brothers get a chance, look up the Fabian Society. A lot of major writers. I think I mentioned George Orwell, George Bernard Shaw. He was also a member. Who else? I believe Lewis Carroll. A lot of major thought effectors for the 20th century were members of the Fabian Society, and also teachers or instructors at the London School of Economics, which George Soros attended. So it is what it is. Peace.